Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we're going to talk about 10 things you should know before moving to South Korea. Now, the last video I made was 10 things to know before teaching in South Korea, but in this video we're going to focus more on what life is like. If you don't know who I am, my name is Jake. I'm currently active duty military. However, I did teach English in South Korea for 6 years in the English program in Korea, EPIK. It was a great experience, and I want to share with you today what life was like in South Korea. This list is in no particular order. Okay, number 1. Korea is an extremely dense urban environment. Even if you're in a small town, you'll usually be living in high-density areas. 95% of Koreans actually live in these apartment condos. They own it, but it's not like a home you would purchase in like the Western style. So these apartment complexes are usually 30 stories tall, and it kind of gets more expensive as you go higher and higher. And they're all just stacked next to each other, very dense, and this has a lot of benefits. For example, there's always stuff to do, things that are open, coffee shops, restaurants, bars. It's a lot of fun. However, it also has its problems. Almost every foreigner that I know who lives in South Korea ends up living in a smaller apartment complex, usually a building about 3 or 5 floors tall. And they all have kind of the same issues and problems. One being the walls are kind of thin and you usually hear your neighbors. In addition, you might hear the neighbors above you, or you might get complaints from your neighbors below you. Just know that if you move to South Korea, it's urban living, apartment living, and you might have, problems with noise or congestion or whatever with living in an urban environment. Number 2, eating their food is unavoidable. Now, I'm personally from the Midwest of America, and we don't have a lot of spicy food or seafood in the Midwest. And spicy food, seafood, and barbecue are kind of like the main staples of Korean food. It's a lot of fresh vegetables and seafood. And I fought it when I first got there. I said, hey, I'm a picky eater. I don't want to have spicy food. I don't want to have seafood. It made my experience there a lot more difficult. So my advice to you is to expand your palate, to challenge yourself. As soon as you get there, try a little bit with every meal. You're maybe not going to take to it at first, but eventually you're going to have to open up. Otherwise, it's going to make your time in Korea more difficult. It took me maybe like 2 years before I started enjoying eating kimchi, and once you get used to it, you end up liking it. It's pretty good. Number 3, Korea is a very English-friendly country. And I want to let you know, don't be stressed out about traveling around the country. Most places you go, there will be signs in English or menus in English, or people willing to help you. Even if they don't speak English, they'll usually understand you, and through gestures and miming, you can pretty much communicate anything that you need to. General rule of thumb, if you have money and you're looking to spend it, somebody will help you, get your business. Don't be scared to explore that temple or go to that beach, and just ask for help wherever possible. Koreans are very generous and they're very friendly. Number 4, air quality in South Korea is pretty bad. If you ask a Korean why, they'll mostly blame China, and that's partially true. China does produce a lot of pollution that does carry over. However, Korea itself is an industrialized country with a lot of urban pollution, so a lot of it is Korea-based. But there also is something called yellow dust. It's this dust that seasonally comes over in like late spring, and it just kind of like falls on everything. And Koreans say that it's sand from the Gobi Desert that blows over, and then it kind of mixes with local pollution and falls. If you leave your window open, it'll just kind of come into your apartment and then settle on everything. People with asthma or allergies struggle in the springtime, especially because of the mixture of natural pollens and then pollutions on top of it. Going along with this, I generally feel like the heating and air conditioning units in South Korea are pretty terrible. They don't have forced air, meaning there are out air ducts and in air ducts. and then they filter all the air like through a central ventilation, kind of like we do mostly in America. Over there, they just have these single wall units, or maybe they're in the ceiling, and they don't really give you any fresh air or filtered air, well filtered air. So that was always kind of a problem I had, because I would develop allergies or just some days not feel very well. Actually, at school, we did have several pollution days in the 6 years that I taught there, meaning the pollution was so bad, they told all the students, stay home, don't go outside, it's not safe. Number 5, dating in Korea can be a little difficult. And for my female friends, dating a Korean man was difficult for different reasons than for a Western man dating a Korean woman. For me, for a Western man dating a Korean woman, often this woman who might be in her late 20s, early 30s, still usually lives at home with her parents and might have a curfew, might have maybe an older sibling that has to chaperone them sometimes. It's a little bizarre when, in the West we say, hey, you're 18, you're an adult, you can make decisions for yourself. That's not how it is in South Korea. You're a child, basically, until you get married yourself, and your parents will still kind of supervise you or basically overrule you if you want to be going out with your friends or potentially seeing someone. For Western women who date Korean men, the complaint that I mostly heard is that they just weren't approached often. If they're out with a group or they're out at a bar, Korean men just don't approach them or try to communicate with them as much. And this could be, one, the language barrier, but it's also kind of a cultural barrier. In Korean culture, it's considered rude to walk up to someone you don't know and just try and talk to them. In their language, there has to be an introduction first, and they have to find out your age, and then that affects how they talk to each other. So dating in Korea is different. However, there's still plenty of success stories, so it's just something you need to be aware of. Number 6, personal space in Korea is much different, and this just goes with Asia in general being more dense with people. But in Western standards, there's no touching. If you're waiting in line, or if you're on the bus or the subway, you don't really want to be touching other people. But in Korea, it's just kind of expected. And it's not considered rude, it's considered normal to basically be pressing up against somebody on the bus or the subway. And when you first experience this, it's a little weird, but over time you eventually get used to it. And you also kind of have to be mindful that, and everybody's going to warn you about ajumas, these old women, who will just push you out of the way. If they're trying to get off the bus or off the train or walking down the street even, it's not considered rude, I guess, for them just to elbow you out of the way, or rib check you. And even when you're like in line at E.Mart, if you leave too much of a gap between you and the person in front of you, like in line to check out, they'll just jump into that gap and pretend like you weren't even in line. You're kind of expected to be, inches away from the person in front of you. It's pretty different. Number 7, you will go out drinking more. Prior to going to South Korea, I honestly didn't drink that much. One, I didn't have the money in college, but two, my personal hobbies just revolved around maybe like board games or more nerdy things. But being in South Korea, the drinking culture there is just huge. All social interaction revolves around drinking. And for Koreans, they're going to drink soju and really bad beer. But even if you're trying to make friends with the other Westerners or the Western scene, it's going to revolve around going to bars and drinking. In Western culture, we usually go over to each other's houses to have parties or celebrations. But because all the foreigners there will live in these single bedroom, apartments, you're going to have to go to public places. And this kind of goes along with it, but you never really spend time in other people's homes like you do in the West. In the 6 years that I was in South Korea, I only ever was invited into 2 of my coworkers' homes. In Korea, that's just how it is. Your home is your personal space, and then bars and restaurants and coffee shops and noribangs are the public spaces where you meet your friends. Only immediate family ever gets invited into your personal home. That's a very private space. So yeah, you end up going out and you end up spending money and you end up drinking. Number 8, people will randomly approach you on the street or in public places to become your new best friend. And the reason why is because English is seen as a valuable skill to have. And there's a lot of Koreans who have been studying English for 5, 10, 15 years, and they've never had the opportunity to practice it with a native speaker, with a foreigner. And there's so much emphasis put on learning English and the value of it for having a professional career that when they see a foreigner, especially in smaller towns, they basically just, it takes a lot of courage for them. I commend them for doing it. But as a Westerner living in Korea, you might get a little sick of it. Just Koreans constantly coming up to you and say, "Hi, how are you? Nice to meet you." And I always was polite because, once again, it takes courage to walk up to a stranger and then practice a foreign language with them. However, it might get a little weird at times, especially if you're trapped on a 4-hour bus ride with one and they want to practice their English with you and they're not really taking the subtle cues that you're not interested in reciprocating. An interesting story I can tell you is when I first arrived in Korea, there was a Korean who walked up to me on the street and just started talking to me, invited me to lunch, said he wanted to take me out. And I said, "Sure, you seem like a friendly guy and your English is amazing. Let's have a conversation." Turns out that he was a hagwon owner, an English hagwon owner, and he was getting married next week. And he invited me to come to his wedding. And I had never been to a Korean wedding, so I said, "Sure, why not? I'll check it out." And I later found out when I got there that there were some other foreign teachers that I knew who had also been met by this hagwon owner and then invited to the wedding. My theory is that he wanted to impress his in-laws, the family members of the woman he was marrying, by showing them that he had a lot of white friends, English-speaking friends, that they were good enough friends that they would come to his wedding. And I never heard from that guy again. I never saw him again. He just wanted me at his wedding to impress other Koreans. Kind of strange. Number 9, Koreans are, as I would say, naively racist. I don't think they're maliciously racist. I just think that when you're born and you live in a country that is 99% ethnically homogenous, you just have no exposure to what it's like being treated differently or discriminated against. And I had a lot of experiences while I was there of especially biracial students in my classes being treated differently. Maybe their mother was Vietnamese or Filipino. And it just, conversations that I would have with Koreans, they would say really offensive, racist things maybe about Japanese people being, genetically inferior. Or I had a Korean friend who once asked me, "Hey Jacob, is it true that black people like watermelon and fried chicken?" To which I responded to him, "Hyungjin, everybody likes fried chicken and watermelon. Where did you hear this?" He didn't mean it to be offensive or malicious, but because they've never experienced racism themselves in their own culture, they really don't have any kind of contextual framework to understand how other people feel when they're treated that way. I will warn you that in the 6 years that I was in South Korea, I was refused service a couple of times, maybe like 3 or 4 times at clubs or bars. I would be walking in with my Korean or Western friends, and then the bouncer or the club owner would say, "These foreigners aren't allowed in here. It's Koreans only." My response to that is simply, okay, I'll take my money and go spend it somewhere else. Business is business, and if you are turning away paying customers, you're an idiot. Number 10 is that Korea is an image-driven culture. And what I mean by this is that as a Westerner, I was always taught growing up that the true beauty is what's on the inside. It's what's on the inside that matters more. In Korea, that is not true. What's on the outside matters more. How you dress, how you groom yourself, how you look. This has its positives and negatives. The negatives might be is that almost every woman that I knew in South Korea has had plastic surgery, either for her eyelids or her nose or her chin. Those are the most common. And it's almost like a rite of passage in their culture. When you turn 18 and graduate from high school, your father just gives you the money to get your face fixed. It's very strange, not something that I think Westerners fully embrace or condone or understand. But it's just how their culture is. I will say that after spending 6 years in South Korea, I started putting more thought and effort into my appearance. And it's actually been to my benefit, taking your haircuts or your clothes or, being clean shaven more serious as a man. It definitely makes better first impressions. It makes people want to get to know you more or spend time with you. That's something that necessarily coming from the Midwest of America out of college, something I never really gave much thought or consideration, but it has a huge impact on your life. Okay guys, if you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a thumbs up. In addition, check out my channel. I'm going to be posting a couple more videos about South Korea soon. Also, leave a comment down below if you have any thoughts or reactions. I love hearing from you. Till next time, take care.